Lovely. So welcome everyone. Can you hear me? Yes? Great. Just a second ago I was talking to myself, so this is great. So first of all, thank you so much for having us. My name is Samuel. I'm from the Innovation Center Denmark in Tel Aviv. There is such a thing, and we're actually we're sort of the innovation arm of the Danish government. We're a combination of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Higher Education and Science. And we work in 8 centers around the world with about 70 professionals helping both startups, corporates, and other Danish institutions be sort of more successful in their day-to-day business through internationalization. And one of the things that we've been working on over the last year very intensively is sort of the area of agri-food, especially here in Tel Aviv. And that's why we sort of got into the talking about the future of where this industry is going. And actually today sort of wanted to look into a little bit this combination of the international and the local perspective, the local as we call it. And today with me I have Cecilie and Jakob, and we're going to be talking about the future of meat and how that's sort of affecting global business. And given that Denmark is one of the biggest worlds, I think that Jakob shared a slide or a thought with me that it's one of the biggest meat producers, I think, per capita in the world. So there's a lot of things to talk about here. Maybe could you just quickly introduce yourself, Cecilie and Jakob, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having us, and thank you for, I'm very happy to be here. My name is Cecilie Lind, and I am the founder of a company called The Protein Kitchen. We produce healthy, fresh meals to go, and snacks and everything, and we do vegan food as well. We work together closely with 7-Eleven, for example, and supermarkets and other convenience stores. So our mission is to make it easier and very available to people to be able to live healthy on the go and on busy days. So that's, well, there's a lot more to it, but that's like a quick presentation of that. But I actually originally came from Microsoft, so I came from a different industry. So I've been in the tech industry as well.
Lovely. Jakob?
Jakob also came from a very different background than food, but co-founder of Simple Feast. Simple Feast is trying to change the future of food into predominantly a plant-based one. We started with a dinner solution that we do most of the prepping, and we're looking at pretty much every instant of the day where we can help people eating more plants. So, yeah.
Amazing. And you both said you come from different backgrounds, but is it correct you have sort of a high-tech background and then went into sports nutrition? And with Jakob, you went sort of from the fitness industry into food. Why is it that sort of more and more entrepreneurs are looking towards the food industry and generally sort of what we're doing there?
Well, for me, I believe that the trends are now more into the healthy food, especially, and also the plant-based foods as well. And it's a very exciting area where you can actually really make a difference, I think. I think that as an entrepreneur, for me especially, it's very important to have like a deeper meaning and where you have to feel like you're making a difference for people, and it's health, so yeah.
Jakob, I mean, you started one of the biggest fitness apps and then sort of shifted gears. What prompted that change?
10 years ago, I would say if you were active, you were off to a good start for the rest of your life. It turns out that 4/5 of the equation is not so much about how active you are, but more about what you put into your body. And working with a California-based, nutrition-based app company as well for a couple of years, you quickly realize that change is incredibly hard. And when it comes to nutrition, it's actually extremely simple. You can personalize it all you want, but it's super simple. The more plants you eat, the better you're off. And the more unprocessed those plants are, the better you're off. So the conclusion is extremely simple, but the change is very hard. So if you want to help people create that change sustainably over time, you need to go into the world of physical food. Creating cookbooks and digital apps, etc. It's just not going to cut it. So you really need to dive in and dive deep to have a chance at actually helping people.
And tell me, I mean, one of the topics that we're looking at sort of is what role Europe will take. I mean, we saw in the last year, I think 3 IPOs or 3 major American startups basically being valued at not just $1 billion, but up to $10 and $15 billion, and sort of a major move. And on the other hand, we have sort of a lot of these companies, actually you shared a little bit about sort of the ingredients that they use and sort of what the burgers and other things like with Impossible Meat and Beyond Burgers and Just Inc. All these companies, what they're doing might not be so good for the long term, especially for humans. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and where you see Europe sort of taking that?
Yeah, so none of those companies are European, right? They're all American. No, so I personally took note of the CEO and co-founder of Whole Foods. And for those who are not familiar with Whole Foods, it's one of the biggest supermarkets in the U.S., high-end, but based on Whole Foods, coming out. And they were the launch pad for the Beyond Meats and other of those meat-like products. And he came out a few weeks ago saying, it may be good for the planet, but it most definitely is not good for you. And I think that's a perspective that we share, that thesis of the future we absolutely share. We've had a system for the past 50, 60, 70 years where it's the name of the game has been the more we can produce for less, the better it is. The more efficient we become, the better it is for humanity, which I totally do not buy into. I think what that has created is a food system that's highly processed, and it's a food system and it's a food supply system that's built for retail, not for consumers. And when you gave up on that road, you gave up on nutritional value, you gave up on taste, you gave up on freshness, you gave up on ultra high temperature treatment, you gave up on GMO, you gave up on additives, preservatives, and the list is very, very long. And it happened like slice by slice. It's not because people were evil. It happened to meet the demands of a retail industry and global dominance of a lot of big brands. Now, there's nothing in that movement that is good for you as a human being. So we're left in a situation where microbiome is very difficulties actually realizing what's going to put into it. So for me, it's a very wrong way the world has developed. It's not good for us, and we're in a situation in 2018 where more people died from the side effects of this than anything else in the world, and way more than people dying from cigarettes. That's the situation today. Lifestyle diseases are all over the place, and it comes down to this: animal protein and processed food. So I think, to your question, those three companies and the future of meat and that type of protein, I love them for being there because it breaks down the barrier of a more plant-based future. But when you look at the actual nutritional content of these products, they're not good for you. So while they're a good first step and a stepping stone and opening up people's imagination to a life without meat, they hopefully are not the end game. The end game is hopefully much more about getting closer to the farmer, closer to the produce, as unprocessed or minimally processed as possible. That's the food that you're going to survive on. That's the food that you're going to thrive on, and it's going to give you the least risk to live a healthy life and a long one.
And I mean, you both sort of are representatives of sort of this, I mean, a little bit this juxtaposition between, on the one hand, you want healthier food and you want unprocessed food and you want these things, but on the other hand, there's less and less people cooking, there's less and less people sort of really taking time to make their meals. Maybe, Cecilia, can you share a little bit about sort of that journey, how that looks like from your side as you are producing basically ready meals and putting them in people's hands? What's the thinking behind that?
Well, we all know that less and less people want to cook, and it's still going that way. Eating solo meals, going out, eating, grabbing something on the go. People are not. I've been working, as a personal trainer and a dietitian as well, and I see that so many people, they have the same. It's the same challenge every single day. They don't have time to cook in the morning. They don't have time to. They don't prioritize to cook their meals from home. And of course, I would love for people to cook, from home and make everything from the bottom, but it's just not the case. So, and as you said, a lot of the meals out there are so processed, and it contains so much. Sorry, can I say crap? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Totally okay.
So at least when the trend is here, and this is how we live our lives. So of course, people are they're supposed to be able to get all these quality meals on the go. And it's actually it's a hard business, a tough business within the food industry, because a lot of the meals out there contain so many artificials. So that's what we do. We don't want to add any artificials at all. So everything is cooked totally from the bottom. But that is, of course, it's more expensive than the meals out there that are not produced like we do.
And let's talk about that expensive, because been thinking, and we've been thinking a little bit about and discussing sort of what does expensive mean. Is it because, for example, if you look at sort of Europe historically, alcohol was cheap at some point, cigarettes were cheap at some point, and then we sort of decided, okay, well, as a countries, we decided to put a tax on them, and then it became really expensive. And the same with gas, you could say. Do you see sort of, when you go nowadays to a supermarket, you have one tax for all your food. Could you imagine a future, and do you see sort of signs of, for example, tax on meat? Is that something, and how do we deal with these lobbies around, for example, meat production, others? Is there a way forward 10 years from now?
I think so. I think it could be a way to do it. But I was actually just listening to something on the radio today. They were talking about all the prices on the cigarettes in Denmark, and they were asking a lot of people out there, if it would cost more. I think it's 10 crowns more than now. Would they stop smoking? And they said no. A lot of people say no. So, but I think you could do something about it by changing the price. I think. I don't know what you think.
I'm a political scientist by training, and when you study economics, the most efficient and powerful thing you can do is change the price of things, and that is I think the key thing you need to do to change behavior. Politically, very difficult when it comes to food, and the typical argument that I hear from political side is that it's going to be skewed towards the part of the population that are already challenged, and that's totally true. But that was the same with alcohol. It's the same as cigarettes, same as sugar tax. So I don't think that's a good excuse. But instead of saying taxes, why don't we lower the taxes or the VAT or whatever on vegetables, remove it altogether on healthy food? That's another way to go about the same thing. For me, and especially when you think climate and health combined, I don't think it's one or two. I think it's all things here and now. When you look about you think about the potential that if people were to change the way they eat in this direction, you're looking at Western countries that are spending 8 to 12% of their GDP on healthcare expenditure. Now, for the most part, in any country, 80% of those expenditure goes towards chronic diseases. Most of those chronic diseases, we're talking type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol. These are not chronic diseases. These are completely reversible. And it's scientifically backed. There's like 1,500 studies showing this. It's science that dates back 10, 20 years. It's not that we don't know. And so the opportunity of savings is infinite. It's political will, and it's the same for the climate it is for the health. Somehow, climate is changing now, right? And with that, the consumption of some of these things, which is remarkable. The health discussion, very difficult to take. Climate was very difficult, still is. Health, I've been in these debates with politicians several times. It's a tough one, but it's absolutely one of the things that we should be doing.
Exactly, and I think that actually answered one of the questions that we just got by the audience. I think one of the topics that I sort of find fascinating is, you're both in the delivery space, and therefore we're also creating more and more, not just food, but we're creating more waste on the other side. And that for me is a little bit, on the one hand, we're the most sort of meat-producing country per capita. And on the other hand, in Denmark, you cannot almost meet any startup or any corporate, and they're not going to talk about the SDGs. We even have a specific booth here. How do you sort of combine the two? How do you as a company think about these things in terms of being both sustainable in food, but also in sort of other categories?
In sorry, what?
In other categories. So when you talk about sort of the waste that you're generating in terms of packaging or similar.
Oh, like that. Well, in our business, we use sustainable. We focus on sustainability. So our packaging is either biodegradable or reused. Working on that all the time, and also, but the way the stores they work with us or our customers, they buy from us. They can buy single servings, so they don't have to buy at least, like, say 20 meals per store. They can buy all the way down to one. So in that way, we really, and we work also with Too Good To Go and companies like that. So we lower the waste of food.
And then,
I think well, if you look at food waste for one, it's the dominant waste is actually happening before it ever meets the consumer, right? So that's what happens in the inflow of the industry. There's a lot of bad products that are never selected for the industry, and then what's happened when it comes into the industry.
Yeah.
And I think when our model works well, we have a food waste percentage of 0.5 to 1%, and average restaurant is probably 20. So there's a lot to be had when you're not on demand, when you're actually a subscription, and when you're portion size and stuff like that. There's a lot of good things to be told there. When it comes to packaging, unfortunately, this is incredibly complex. In this country in particular, it varies by country, but in this country in particular, you're looking at every municipality having its own rules. Right, so that means that the definition for what's paper and what's reusable, carton, it varies, right? So it's super complex. When you move into food in particular, there's a lot of guidelines that you need to fulfill. And we made a choice to never use plastic. We've shipped packaging many times. I think the real future isn't circular. It's not having waste at all. It's coming up with new types of packaging that puts into a flow where reusing a pack 5 times is not going to cut it. 100, 200 times is going to be interesting. And if that material is made out of anything but fossil fuels, so no plastic, no nothing, then you have a real shot at creating an enormous, powerful change. And you know, without saying too much, I think we can go live with that within a year. Maybe not in Denmark, but probably in California. There's a lot of stuff happening, and it's a big revolution. There are many people that need to work on this in combination to make it happen.
And tell me, I mean, one of the questions from the audience, and it's also one of the questions that I've looked into, is sort of, there seems to be a massive shift, at least in Denmark and sort of the Nordics, on consumer behavior and consumer perception. And we talked a little bit about this, and I think your businesses are in some way, the success of them is driven by sort of changing consumer behavior. But can you maybe, Jakob, since you just raised, I think, 30 million euros to sort of go also big in the US, can you share a little bit how that consumer behavior is changing and has changed over the last couple of years, and also how it's maybe different for what we perceive as sort of our sort of, let's say, European or Northern European mindset compared to what you're seeing in the US and elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, and the U.S. is literally, it's a combination of a lot of different states. California, I consider, you know, that's very different from most of the states in the U.S. Outside the Northeast coast. But from a Danish perspective, it's you know, 3 years ago people were laughing at us, and they were laughing at me for going into this, and they did 4 years ago it was just finding us ridiculous to go into this. Everything changed with the UN report last year, coming out in October on the 12 years left. And it changed again in January when saying not only is it good for the planet, it's also good for human health. And then the biodiversity report came in the spring of 2019. Those reports and scientific studies are so severe and they're so impactful that you can't ignore it anymore. So the collective consciousness also brought to play at Greta Thunberg from Sweden has actually, for the first time, I'm seeing numbers that are encouraging. The meat consumption in Denmark fell 5% in the past year, for the first time in history. The domestic air travel in Sweden fell 10% in the past year. People are changing. They're opening up their eyes. And that's one of the beautiful things about the internet, is like you can't hide this. You go into the healthcare system, traditional medicine, they won't even look at this, right? Even despite the impact of it. Because that's not how they're trained. They're trained to treat symptoms, not actually try to prevent them. And it's not to say anything bad about the doctors, it's just the system we've created, right? But for the first time, I see a collective consciousness that is moving in a different direction. And that, I think, is very powerful. And I think we're in the very, very early days of a massive revolution. It's been a while since I've been positive about this, but I am these days.
Yeah. And tell me, I mean, Cecilia, you work a lot with 7-Eleven and some of the other sort of biggest stores globally. When I think of this and sort of now, and you said we have 12 years sort of left, there's an incredible sort of pressure to get to solutions fast, but there's also entrenched lobbies, and there's sort of very powerful players, and we have EU subsidies and other things that people are talking about. What do you see from sort of the corporate side and the business community? What are they telling you, and what are they sort of, what's the impression that you're getting from their perspective?
From the trends and what's...
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, they're, of course, especially 7-Eleven is very innovative, and they're very open to the trends happening, and and they're very focused on the plant-based especially, and also the sustainability and everything. So a lot of the big companies they want to go that way, but they need the people to work with that can do that for them. So yeah, it's...
And do you think that there's sort of some behind the scenes sort of pushback from the, let's say, existing lobby, whether it's in meat or in milk or in other areas? Because I think at the end of the day you're competing for shelf space, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you manage that, and how do you get to a volume where you can actually compete?
Well, that's hard to say actually. It's kind of hard to answer that question without saying too much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the biggest industry in the world. 1.1 billion people are working in this industry, right? So it's by far the biggest industry. There's a lot of interest at play here. We've been sued several times by the meat industry. They've been coming at us several times, and there's nothing to show for it, right? But for sure, they're trying to protect what's left of it, and it's very big industries, and they, they're not bad industries per se. It's a legacy thing, but I'd wish they actually, instead of fighting like that, try to encourage the change. We have in Denmark, this country, we have Association for Agriculture, but they're always only advocating meat. Not all the farmers that are producing vegetables. There are amazing farmers out there who are doing this. And the constant argument is that we're so efficient at this in this country that if we don't do it, somebody less efficient than us will do it. I'm like, but why don't you start thinking about products? If you need people to change, and you need to create the market, and to create a market, you need to create opportunities for people to actually select from. If they're not there, they're not going to change. So it's a very kind of old-fashioned logic. You're trying to protect rather than innovate. And to innovate, it's hard. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost money for decades. So that's why we need governments and the growth fund and these kind of actors and players. People forget that Silicon Valley was made out of public money. Massive investments in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Today we think it's all private. It was publicly funded. We need the same thing to happen in this industry. These farmers need help.
But if you look at some of the bigger companies, the meat producers, they are actually starting to make meat with 50% vegetables. So they are trying, even though they're still producing meat, they're trying to do something. And also the milk producers, they are also doing like these now half plant-based, half milk kind of products.
I mean,
so they're trying.
We just had the CEO of Nestle in Israel looking for new products, new applications, and I think there's certainly a wish, but you get to the point where sort of you have let's say a $1 or $2 billion business that you're running and managing, and with tens of thousands of people in it every day, and then you're trying to launch a new brand, and you don't quite know on the consumer reception what will be the result. But maybe on a closing note, what do you think? Where do you see sort of the industry 10 years from now, and how do you think we're going to get there, and how do we as Europe play a role even?
I think Europe has a voice. I think that Scandinavia especially has a voice, because we're seen as we're looked upon as being high quality, and because we're such a restrictive country when it comes to food, so they look at us and see what are they doing in Scandinavia. And also, of course, we can use the social media and the internet to also inspire with all this with this trend. But I think, as we talked about, that you need to inspire people and make it. We need people to feel that it's their own choice. That it's not me pointing a finger at them saying you have to do this, you should do that, and change their behavior by lift my finger and say this is the way to do it. You can try and inspire and show the way and try to communicate all these important things that are happening with our climate and our health especially as well. That is very relatable. Yeah.
And as you're doing, provide real alternatives. Jakob, any thoughts on where you see the industry 10 years from now?
No, I mean, I completely agree. I think people need to have options. They need to see and feel a different future. And if what you're presenting them to is better than what they came from, they will make that choice deliberately and voluntarily. You don't have to put a stick there. So that, I think, is super important if you want to encourage behavior. For Europe and our role, I think we have a different history. We have a different culture. We have, to your point, a different sense of quality. And I think in many other parts of the world, take China, the US, that's not the case. Right? So I think we should do more of what we're good at. And that's a different philosophy than the super manufacturing, big industry line of thinking. And we've had amazing food innovation going on in Europe in the past 20, especially 10 years. Make that a starting point for something a lot bigger. And I think Europe has a chance to protect that image and grow that into becoming globally relevant.
Yeah. Amazing. So thank you guys so much. I think we're out of time here, but we'll be over there, and everyone's welcome to come with questions, I guess. Thank you guys, and thanks everyone so much.
Thank you so much, guys. That was super interesting.